The trial by fire. The momentum had been building slowly, like a tide inching higher with each passing day. Word of Maya's food truck had begun to spread beyond the usual blocks she parked on, thanks in no small part to Ethan's presence and the curiosity his name carried. Some came because they had read about him in magazines years ago and couldn't resist seeing if the rumors were true. Others came because they had heard about the woman who cooked food that could make even a billionaire look humbled and grateful. Whatever the reason, the lines grew longer, the tips heavier, and for the first time in months, Maya felt as though she might finally be stepping onto the other side of struggle. The real breakthrough came when a local community organizer stopped by the truck one afternoon. She was a woman named Gloria, with sharp eyes and a warm smile, who was planning a charity food festival to raise money for after-school programs in the neighborhood. She told Maya that she wanted her truck to be one of the featured vendors. "Your food has a reputation for warming hearts," Gloria said. "And that's exactly the spirit this event needs." Maya was hesitant at first. Opportunities like that often came with costs she couldn't afford, but Gloria assured her that the event would cover permits and setup fees. All she needed to bring was her best food and her passion. For Maya, it felt like a door opening that she hadn't dared to knock on. She agreed, though in private she worried how she would keep up with the demand of hundreds of people in one afternoon. Ethan, of course, insisted on helping. He threw himself into planning as though it were a corporate launch, sketching out prep schedules, calculating ingredient quantities, and even persuading a few of his old contacts to donate supplies in exchange for low-key credit. Maya bristled at first. She didn't want anyone thinking she was leaning on his wealth, but Ethan made it clear that he wasn't throwing money at her dream. He was putting in sweat, time, and creativity. For once, she let herself accept it. In the weeks leading up to the festival, the two of them worked harder than they ever had. Maya rose before dawn, Ethan meeting her at the market without complaint. They chopped, marinated, and tested recipes late into the night, their small kitchen filled with steam and laughter, and the occasional flare of frustration when exhaustion frayed their patience. Yet even in those tense moments, there was an undercurrent of something steady, something resilient. They were learning not only how to share work, but how to share trust. By the morning of the festival, the city park was alive with the colors and sounds of celebration. Booths lined the walkways, music floated through the air, children darted between balloons, and the smell of dozens of cuisines mingled into a heady perfume. Maya's truck stood proudly among them, decorated with hand-painted signs and strings of lights that Ethan had insisted on hanging the night before. She wore her apron like armor, her hair tied back, her face set with determination. Ethan stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, ready to serve. At first, everything went beautifully. The line for her truck stretched longer than any other, people murmuring with delight as they tasted her oxtail stew, her fried plantains, her cornbread muffins brushed with honey. Local reporters stopped by, snapping photos and asking for quotes. Maya answered nervously but with pride, her eyes sparkling with the joy of watching people savor her food. For the first time, she felt like she belonged not just on the corner but in the city's food scene itself. Then Trent arrived. The sight of his silver Lexus pulling up at the edge of the park made Maya's stomach clench. She told herself to ignore him, to stay focused, but Trent never came to watch silently. He stepped out, his suit crisp, his smile poisonous, and made his way through the crowd with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him attention. His eyes locked on Ethan first, then on Maya, and the glint of malice there told her everything she needed to know. Well, Trent said loudly enough for the crowd nearby to hear, "If it isn't Ethan Cole, reduced to peddling stew from the back of a truck. Tell me, how much is she paying you to wash dishes, Ethan? Or are you just working for scraps now that you've lost everything?" The words rippled through the people in line, whispers spreading like wildfire. Maya's blood boiled, but before she could speak, Ethan stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Walk away, Trent." But Trent wasn't here to walk away. He had come to destroy. He leaned in close enough for Maya to smell the expensive cologne clinging to him, and his voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "You really think you can crawl back into relevance by hiding in her shadow? You'll drag her down just like you dragged down your empire." Maya opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, chaos erupted. A sudden sharp smell hit her nose, something burning. She turned toward the fryer where smoke was pouring out, the oil bubbling violently. Her heart lurched. Someone had tampered with it. She knew her truck inside and out, and that kind of malfunction didn't happen by accident. She rushed forward, yanking the power, shouting for Ethan. Together they managed to douse the flames before they spread, but the damage was done. The crowd had scattered, people whispering about safety, about carelessness. Reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras flashing at the smoke still curling from the fryer. Trent stood back, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. "What a shame," he drawled. "Looks like some people just aren't cut out for the big stage." Maya's chest heaved, fury and humiliation crashing through her in equal measure. She wanted to scream, to call him out for the sabotage she knew in her bones he had orchestrated. But she also knew how the world worked. The rich and powerful covered their tracks, and people like her were left looking incompetent. Her dream, her reputation, could unravel in minutes if she wasn't careful. Before she could act, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was low but carried enough strength to cut through the murmurs. "You think you've won, Trent? All you've done is remind me why men like you never build anything worth remembering. You tear down because you're afraid to create. But this—" He gestured to Maya, to the truck, to the food still waiting to be served. "This is stronger than you'll ever be." Maya looked at him, stunned as he turned back to the crowd. He raised his voice, addressing the onlookers. "The fryer's down, but the food isn't. If you came for warmth, for flavor, for soul, Maya Williams still has plenty to serve. And I'll stand here all night with her to make sure you get it." Something in his conviction shifted the atmosphere. People who had been edging away began to drift back. Gloria, the organizer, stepped forward and clapped her hands, urging the crowd to support Maya. Slowly, the line formed again. The whispers softened into encouragement. Customers approached not with suspicion but with sympathy, eager to show they weren't swayed by sabotage. Maya's hands trembled as she returned to serving, but Ethan was right there beside her, steady, unflinching. Together they worked through the chaos, plating dishes, offering extra cornbread as an apology, smiling even as exhaustion weighed them down. The fryer was ruined, some of their menu cut short, but they didn't stop. They refused to let Trent's shadow smother their light. By the end of the night, when the festival wound down and the last of the customers had left, Maya collapsed onto the curb, her apron stained, her hair damp with sweat. Ethan sat beside her, his shoulders slumped but his expression calm. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The city around them buzzed faintly, but here, in this small pocket of quiet, there was only the sound of their breathing. Finally, Maya turned to him, her voice raw. "Why did you do that? Why did you put yourself out there for me, when you already know what people say about you?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because I know what it feels like to have everything ripped away in front of the world. And I won't let anyone do that to you, not while I'm here. You deserve better. You've earned better." Maya swallowed hard, emotions colliding in her chest. Gratitude, fear, anger at Trent, and something deeper she was almost afraid to name. She wanted to tell Ethan how much his words meant, how much his presence had steadied her in the storm, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she let the silence speak, their shoulders brushing, their breaths sinking, their hearts silently acknowledging what neither dared yet to say. The trial had tested them both, and though the scars of the night would linger, something had emerged stronger, something that neither sabotage nor humiliation could undo. Dreams collide. The days that followed their revelation carried a different weight, as though the city itself had shifted under their feet. Maya felt it most keenly in the spaces between customers, in the moments when she caught Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Sometimes it was gentle amusement when she scolded him for trying to stir a pot the wrong way. Other times it was quiet admiration as he listened to her talk about her mother's recipes, or the customers who came back week after week for the comfort of her food. But most often it was something deeper, an intensity that made her feel both seen and exposed, as if he wasn't just looking at her but into her, as if the years that had separated them hadn't built a wall but a bridge. Maya tried to bury the feelings beneath her usual pragmatism. She reminded herself that she didn't have time for distractions, especially not ones that came in the form of a man who had once belonged to a world of wealth and privilege. She ran a food truck, not a fairy tale. The bills on her counter at home were proof enough of that. Yet every time Ethan showed up, whether to carry crates of vegetables from her supplier, to scrub her griddle until it gleamed, or simply to sit on the curb and share cornbread with her, she found it harder to pretend that his presence didn't matter. For Ethan, the food truck became a kind of sanctuary. He hadn't expected it, hadn't planned for it, but day after day as he pulled on plain clothes and slipped unnoticed through the city, until he reached Maya's corner, he felt something inside him loosen. In the food truck, he wasn't Ethan Cole, the fallen billionaire, the betrayed CEO, the tabloid fodder. He was just a man with tired hands, wiping down counters, peeling potatoes, learning how to fold parchment paper around fried fish so the grease didn't soak through. The work grounded him in ways boardrooms never had, and more than that, Maya grounded him. Her fierce independence, her resilience in the face of exhaustion, her refusal to let bitterness harden her, it humbled him. She was stronger than anyone he had met in the rarefied circles of his old life, and though he never said it aloud, he admired her more than she could know. It was during one of those quieter evenings, when the rush had ended and the truck was bathed in the golden glow of the streetlights, that Ethan finally broached the subject he had been holding back. He was sitting on the counter, legs dangling like a boy instead of a man nearing 40, while Maya wiped down the grill with broad, practiced strokes. "You ever think about what this could be if you had more?" he asked, his voice casual but edged with seriousness. Maya didn't look up. "More what?" "More trucks. A restaurant. Staff to help you. You've built something amazing here, Maya, but it's barely scratching the surface of what it could be." She snorted, tossing the rag into the bucket of soapy water. "And what? You think I should just snap my fingers and make money appear? I don't have investors lining up to throw cash at me, Ethan. I barely keep this thing running as it is." "I could help," he said softly. The words hung in the air like a dangerous spark. Maya froze, her back stiffening. Slowly, she turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "There it is. I was waiting for it. The charity offer. It's not charity," he said quickly, sliding off the counter. "Maya, you've got something real here. People line up for your food because it's not just good, it's unforgettable. You could grow this, make it sustainable, make it big. I know how to build things. I've done it before. Let me do this with you." Her jaw tightened. "With me or for me? Because I don't need another man swooping in like some savior trying to fix my life. I built this truck from nothing, Ethan. From nights I went hungry so I could afford meat for the stew. From mornings I woke up before the sun to chop onions until my eyes burned. From prayers whispered over pots because I didn't know how I was going to pay rent. This isn't your empire to rebuild. It's mine." Ethan flinched at the steel in her voice, but he didn't retreat. "I know, and I respect that more than you think. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. I'm not talking about buying you out or taking control. I'm talking about partnership. About using what I know to support what you've already built." Maya studied him, searching for the catch. She had seen too many offers disguised as generosity. Too many deals that left people like her indebted or stripped of their own power. She wasn't about to hand over her dream. Not even to Ethan, not even to the boy who had once been her best friend. "You want to prove it's not charity?" she said finally, her voice steady. "Then get up tomorrow at 5 a.m. and meet me at the market. We'll see how long you last hauling 50-pound bags of rice and arguing with vendors over prices. If you're still standing by the end of the day, maybe I'll believe you." Ethan's lips quirked into a half smile. Challenge accepted. The next morning, before the sun even rose, Ethan was there. Maya half expected him not to show, or worse, to show up in some polished car with an assistant trailing behind. But he arrived on foot in worn sneakers and a hoodie, his hair slightly disheveled, looking more like a man ready for hard labor than a former CEO. The market was chaos. Vendors shouting, crates being unloaded, fish on ice glistening under fluorescent lights, spices perfuming the air. Maya moved through it with the sharpness of a soldier on mission, haggling over prices, inspecting produce with a practiced eye, calculating in her head how far each dollar could stretch. Ethan followed her lead, carrying bags of onions and sacks of rice, nearly stumbling under the weight but refusing to complain. He sweated, he strained, and when Maya glanced at him, expecting to see annoyance or arrogance, she found only determination. By the time they returned to the truck, Ethan's shoulders were aching, his palms raw, but he hadn't quit. Maya pretended not to be impressed, though a part of her couldn't help but admire his persistence. Maybe he wasn't just talking. Maybe he really meant to stand beside her, not above her. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan became part of the truck's rhythm. He learned to chop vegetables to Maya's exacting standards, to season the stew without overwhelming the delicate balance of flavors, to handle customers with a mix of patience and firmness. He wasn't perfect, he burned rice twice and nearly dropped an entire tray of fried chicken once, but he never grew defensive. He laughed at his mistakes, took Maya's scolding in stride and tried again until he got it right. Their partnership began to draw attention. Regulars noticed the tall, quiet man behind the counter, helping Maya with a humility that contrasted sharply with the headlines that had once portrayed him as ruthless. Word spread that Ethan Cole was working in a food truck, and though some people came out of curiosity, most left talking about the food and about the woman who had somehow turned a billionaire into her assistant. One evening, as they sat on the curb eating leftovers, Maya glanced at Ethan and said, "You're not half bad for someone who used to live in boardrooms." He smiled, tearing a piece of cornbread in half. "And you're not half bad for someone who thinks she doesn't need anyone." She rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her chest betrayed her. For all her resistance, she couldn't deny that the days felt lighter with him beside her. He hadn't taken over. He hadn't diminished her. He had simply shown up day after day, willing to carry weight that had once been hers alone. And in that quiet consistency, something deeper than business began to bloom. Something fragile. Something dangerous. Something that felt like the beginning of love. The bracelet and the stew. The air turned cooler as September edged closer. The kind of cool that whispered of changing seasons, when the afternoons still baked in sunshine but the evenings carried an undertone of autumn. Maya noticed the difference more keenly than most. The hot dishes she sold, the oxtail stew, the curry goat, the slow-simmered collard greens, moved quicker in cooler weather, and though she would never admit it aloud, she liked the early hints of fall. It made the city seem gentler, as though it had let go of summer's manic energy for something quieter, steadier. She needed that steadiness now more than ever, because Ethan had begun to occupy her thoughts in a way she hadn't allowed anyone to in years. He came by almost daily now. Sometimes he ordered food, sometimes he only stood near the truck, leaning on the same bench as though it had become his anchor. Other times, when the rush ended and she was closing up, he rolled up his sleeves without being asked and worked beside her as if he belonged there. He never complained, never acted as though the work was beneath him, though Maya sometimes caught him staring at his hands after scrubbing a pan, as if even he couldn't reconcile how strange it was for him to be doing this. But in those moments she also caught something else in his eyes. Relief, maybe even peace. As if the noise of his past, the betrayals, the scandals, the spotlight, all fell away while he stood elbow to elbow with her inside a truck that smelled of garlic and thyme. For Maya, his presence was disarming. She had long since taught herself to be cautious, to expect people to leave, to assume men especially only showed interest when they wanted something. But Ethan never pressed. He didn't pry into her personal life, didn't dangle his money as a solution, didn't try to charm his way into her heart. Instead, he listened, really listened, to her stories, about her mother's cooking, about the nights she used to fall asleep on the worn couch in the truck when the rent at home was too high, about the customers who had become like family to her. And in return, though he was careful, he began to share fragments of himself. Not the Ethan Cole splashed across business magazines, but the boy who used to sneak comic books under his pillow, who once dreamed of building gadgets not because they could make him rich, but because he liked fixing things for people. It was one late evening, after most of the city had gone quiet, that the truth began to break open. They had just finished cleaning and Maya leaned against the counter, exhausted, the bracelet on her wrist glinting faintly under the overhead light. Ethan noticed it again, his gaze settling on it with the kind of focus that made her uneasy. "You've worn that a long time," he said, his voice low as though speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. Maya glanced down at it instinctively, then back at him. "It's just a bracelet." His lips curved, not in amusement but in recognition. "No, it's that bracelet. The one with the little blue charm. I know it because I gave it away once, a long time ago." Her chest tightened. The memory came unbidden. The porch of a big house she had thought looked like a castle when she was a child. The boy with scabby knees and a mischievous grin, pressing the bracelet into her palm with all the solemnity of a priest giving a vow. "If you wear this, we'll always be friends," he had said. She had believed him so fiercely that she had never taken it off, not even when it grew too tight. Not even when people teased her for wearing something so childish as she grew older. She had clung to it as though it were proof that someone once had promised not to leave her, but the boy had left anyway. One day he was there sharing peanut butter crackers under the kitchen table, and the next he was gone. She had waited for him on her mother's porch for days, certain he would come back, certain he would say goodbye. He never did. That wound had hardened into something she rarely touched, a scar buried beneath the work of survival. She swallowed hard, pushing the memory down. Lots of kids gave away bracelets. You must be mistaken. But Ethan didn't look away. His eyes were steady, filled with a quiet kind of desperation. Maya, I wasn't mistaken the first time I tasted your stew, and I'm not mistaken now. It's you. You're the girl I grew up with. You're the one who used to cheat at chess and laugh like you just discovered gold when you got away with it. You're the one who told me I had fancy socks when nobody else noticed. His voice cracked slightly. You're her. The kitchen of her food truck suddenly felt too small, too hot. Maya's hands trembled as she braced them on the counter, trying to breathe through the rush of memories his words unleashed. The stew, the bracelet, the socks, the laughter. It was all too specific to ignore. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw past the lines age and loss had carved into his face. She saw the boy he had been, the boy she had called E.T., short for Ethan, though sometimes she had teased him by saying it stood for extra trouble. She saw him hiding under porches with her when thunderstorms scared them both, saw him carefully building forts from blankets, saw him standing awkwardly tall the day his mother had died, his eyes wide with grief he hadn't known how to name. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. T. The way his eyes softened told her everything. Maya. For a moment, silence pressed heavy between them, thick with 20 years of distance collapsing into a single second. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. The air felt charged, as if the city outside had fallen away and only this small space mattered. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice unsteady. I'm sorry. I never said goodbye. My dad, after my mom died, he sold the house, sent me to boarding school. Everything changed so fast. I didn't know how to come back. I didn't even know if I was allowed. Maya felt anger and sorrow knotting in her chest, tangling together until she couldn't separate them. She remembered waiting on her porch every day for a week, convinced her friend would return only to realize he never would. She remembered crying quietly into her pillow, vowing never to trust promises again, and yet here he was, the boy who had left her and the man who had stepped between her and Trent's violence, the man who had taken a slap meant for her without hesitation. You didn't come back, she said softly, her voice raw. I waited for you. I know, Ethan whispered, guilt thick in his throat. I was 12. I didn't know how to fight him. I didn't know how to fight anything. And then I buried it because it hurt too much to remember what I'd lost. For the first time since she had met him again, Maya saw not the billionaire in exile, not the man the tabloids had crucified, but the boy she had once shared her world with. She saw his fear, his regret, his loneliness. And though part of her wanted to cling to anger, another part, the part that still wore his bracelet, couldn't ignore the flicker of relief that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't forgotten her. She turned away, busying herself with stacking trays that didn't need stacking. The past is gone, Ethan. We're not kids anymore. No, he said quietly, stepping closer, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. We're not. But maybe that means we have the chance to choose differently this time. Maya's hand stilled. Her heart pounded against her ribs, torn between the instinct to protect herself and the longing she hadn't realized she still carried. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that the boy who had once promised forever was still somewhere inside this man. But belief was dangerous. Belief had cost her before, so she said nothing. She simply kept working, though her mind and heart were no longer steady. And Ethan, perhaps understanding that pushing further would only widen the fragile crack between them, stayed silent too. But as they stood there, the bracelet glinting faintly under the dim truck lights, both of them knew that the past had already begun to reclaim them, pulling them toward a reckoning neither could avoid. The bracelet and the stew. The air turned cooler as September edged closer, the kind of cool that whispered of changing seasons, when the afternoons still baked in sunshine but the evenings carried an undertone of autumn. Maya noticed the difference more keenly than most. The hot dishes she sold, the oxtail stew, the curry goat, the slow-simmered collard greens, moved quicker in cooler weather, and though she would never admit it aloud, she liked the early hints of fall. It made the city seem gentler, as though it had let go of summer's manic energy for something quieter, steadier. She needed that steadiness now more than ever, because Ethan had begun to occupy her thoughts in a way she hadn't allowed anyone to in years. He came by almost daily now. Sometimes he ordered food, sometimes he only stood near the truck, leaning on the same bench as though it had become his anchor. Other times, when the rush ended and she was closing up, he rolled up his sleeves without being asked and worked beside her as if he belonged there. He never complained, never acted as though the work was beneath him, though Maya sometimes caught him staring at his hands after scrubbing a pan, as if even he couldn't reconcile how strange it was for him to be doing this. But in those moments, she also caught something else in his eyes. Relief, maybe even peace. As if the noise of his past, the betrayals, the scandals, the spotlight, all fell away while he stood elbow to elbow with her inside a truck that smelled of garlic and thyme. For Maya, his presence was disarming. She had long since taught herself to be cautious, to expect people to leave, to assume men especially only showed interest when they wanted something. But Ethan never pressed. He didn't pry into her personal life, didn't dangle his money as a solution, didn't try to charm his way into her heart. Instead, he listened, really listened, to her stories, about her mother's cooking, about the nights she used to fall asleep on the worn couch in the truck when the rent at home was too high, about the customers who had become like family to her, and in return, though he was careful, he began to share fragments of himself. Not the Ethan Cole splashed across business magazines, but the boy who used to sneak comic books under his pillow, who once dreamed of building gadgets not because they could make him rich, but because he liked fixing things for people. It was one late evening, after most of the city had gone quiet, that the truth began to break open. They had just finished cleaning and Maya leaned against the counter, exhausted, the bracelet on her wrist glinting faintly under the overhead light. Ethan noticed it again, his gaze settling on it with the kind of focus that made her uneasy. "You've worn that a long time," he said, his voice low as though speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. Maya glanced down at it instinctively, then back at him. "It's just a bracelet." His lips curved, not in amusement but in recognition. "No, it's that bracelet, the one with the little blue charm. I know it because I gave it away once, a long time ago." Her chest tightened. The memory came unbidden. The porch of a big house she had thought looked like a castle when she was a child. The boy with scabby knees and a mischievous grin, pressing the bracelet into her palm with all the solemnity of a priest giving a vow. "If you wear this, we'll always be friends," he had said. She had believed him so fiercely that she had never taken it off, not even when it grew too tight, not even when people teased her for wearing something so childish as she grew older. She had clung to it as though it were proof that someone once had promised not to leave her, but the boy had left anyway. One day he was there sharing peanut butter crackers under the kitchen table, and the next he was gone. She had waited for him on her mother's porch for days, certain he would come back, certain he would say goodbye. He never did. That wound had hardened into something she rarely touched, a scar buried beneath the work of survival. She swallowed hard, pushing the memory down. "Lots of kids gave away bracelets. You must be mistaken." But Ethan didn't look away. His eyes were steady, filled with a quiet kind of desperation. "Maya, I wasn't mistaken the first time I tasted your stew, and I'm not mistaken now. It's you. You're the girl I grew up with. You're the one who used to cheat at chess and laugh like you just discovered gold when you got away with it. You're the one who told me I had fancy socks when nobody else noticed." His voice cracked slightly. "You're her." The kitchen of her food truck suddenly felt too small, too hot. Maya's hands trembled as she braced them on the counter, trying to breathe through the rush of memories his words unleashed. The stew, the bracelet, the socks, the laughter. It was all too specific to ignore. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw past the lines age and loss had carved into his face. She saw the boy he had been, the boy she had called E.T., short for Ethan, though sometimes she had teased him by saying it stood for extra trouble. She saw him hiding under porches with her when thunderstorms scared them both, saw him carefully building forts from blankets, saw him standing awkwardly tall the day his mother had died, his eyes wide with grief he hadn't known how to name. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. "T." The way his eyes softened told her everything. "Maya." For a moment silence pressed heavy between them, thick with 20 years of distance collapsing into a single second. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. The air felt charged as if the city outside had fallen away and only this small space mattered. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice unsteady. I'm sorry. I never said goodbye. My dad, after my mom died, he sold the house, sent me to boarding school. Everything changed so fast. I didn't know how to come back. I didn't even know if I was allowed. Maya felt anger and sorrow knotting in her chest, tangling together until she couldn't separate them. She remembered waiting on her porch every day for a week, convinced her friend would return only to realize he never would. She remembered crying quietly into her pillow, vowing never to trust promises again, and yet here he was, the boy who had left her and the man who had stepped between her and Trent's violence, the man who had taken a slap meant for her without hesitation. You didn't come back, she said softly, her voice raw. I waited for you. I know, Ethan whispered, guilt thick in his throat. I was 12. I didn't know how to fight him. I didn't know how to fight anything. And then I buried it because it hurt too much to remember what I'd lost. For the first time since she had met him again, Maya saw not the billionaire in exile, not the man the tabloids had crucified, but the boy she had once shared her world with. She saw his fear, his regret, his loneliness. And though part of her wanted to cling to anger, another part, the part that still wore his bracelet, couldn't ignore the flicker of relief that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't forgotten her. She turned away, busying herself with stacking trays that didn't need stacking. The past is gone, Ethan. We're not kids anymore. No, he said quietly, stepping closer, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. We're not. But maybe that means we have the chance to choose differently this time. Maya's hand stilled. Her heart pounded against her ribs, torn between the instinct to protect herself and the longing she hadn't realized she still carried. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that the boy who had once promised forever was still somewhere inside this man. But belief was dangerous. Belief had cost her before, so she said nothing. She simply kept working, though her mind and heart were no longer steady. And Ethan, perhaps understanding that pushing further would only widen the fragile crack between them, stayed silent too. But as they stood there, the bracelet glinting faintly under the dim truck lights, both of them knew that the past had already begun to reclaim them, pulling them toward a reckoning neither could avoid. Rivals and revelation, the city was restless that week. Rain had given way to damp skies and heavy winds, the kind that rattled loose signs and sent napkins skittering across sidewalks. For Maya, the change in weather meant steadier business. People warmed themselves with her oxtail stew and cornbread, her fried catfish and collard greens. She worked with a rhythm that was both exhausting and soothing, her days stitched together by the repetition of chopping, seasoning, ladling, serving. Yet beneath the routine, she carried a quiet tension she couldn't shake. It had settled into her chest ever since Ethan reappeared at her food truck, and each day that passed without seeing him again made her wonder whether she had imagined the pull between them. But she hadn't imagined it. 3 days later, as the lunch rush swelled, Ethan appeared again. Not in the gray hoodie that had made him look almost invisible, and not in the polished armor of his billionaire past, but in simple jeans and a black sweater. He carried himself differently now, though still with the weight of someone used to being noticed and scrutinized. The whispers followed him again through the line, customers nudging one another, phones discreetly lifted to capture a photo. Maya felt a stab of pity, realizing how exhausting it must be to live under that kind of constant gaze, and at the same time a flicker of irritation. He was going to scare her customers away if people started treating her truck like a paparazzi target. When he reached the counter, she crossed her arms, pretending to be stern. If you keep showing up here, you're going to ruin my business. Folks don't want to eat while they're trying to sneak celebrity snapshots. He smiled faintly, sliding a few bills into the tip jar before she even rang up his order. Then think of it as free advertising. Your food is going to go viral whether you want it to or not. Maya rolled her eyes and muttered, Lord help me. But there was no real bite in her voice. She served him stew again, though this time she added a fried plantain on the side, almost as though daring him to notice the difference, and slid the container toward him. Go eat on the bench like a normal person, please. You're making my regulars nervous. Ethan chuckled, took the food, and did exactly as she said. But unlike other days when he left after eating in silence, this time he lingered. When the crowd thinned and only a trickle of customers remained, he returned to lean casually against the counter. So, he said, his tone light but his eyes serious, do you ever think about expanding? A restaurant maybe, or a second truck? Maya snorted. Do I think about it? Every single night. Do I have the money to do it? Absolutely not. This truck eats up more repairs than a car with 90,000 miles. I'm just trying to make it to the end of the month without the bank breathing down my neck. Ethan nodded slowly, as though filing the information away, though he didn't press further. Instead, he asked questions about her recipes, about how she learned to cook, about the neighborhoods she had grown up in. She answered with cautious honesty, realizing that for all his wealth and reputation, Ethan asked like someone who actually wanted to listen. That more than anything unsettled her. She had learned long ago that most men only asked questions so they could pivot back to themselves. Ethan's silence, his careful way of absorbing her words without rushing to respond, was disarming. It was late afternoon when the confrontation happened. Maya was wiping down the counter when a familiar silver Lexus pulled to the curb. The sight made her stomach drop before she even saw who stepped out. Trent Mallory, sharp suit and sharper smirk, his cologne heavy enough to announce him before his voice did. He strolled up to the truck with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Customers shrank back instinctively, recognizing trouble when they saw it. "Well, if it isn't the queen of the curbside shack," Trent said loudly, his eyes sweeping over Maya with a mixture of disdain and unwanted appraisal. "Business must be booming if you've got Ethan Cole hiding out here every day." "What's the matter, Ethan? Too ashamed to show your face in real restaurants?" Maya's hand tightened around the rag she was holding. She glanced at Ethan, who had stiffened at the sound of Trent's voice but remained seated on the bench, his jaw clenched. She could see the battle in his eyes. Part of him wanted to get up and respond. Part of him had already learned that silence robbed Trent of satisfaction. But silence wasn't Maya's style. She leaned over the counter, her voice cool and cutting. "Sir, unless you're here to order food, you're blocking my line. I don't care how shiny your car is or how expensive your tie looks. Nobody wants your noise while they're trying to eat." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. A few people stifled laughter. Trent's face darkened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss meant only for her. "You should know your place. Talking back to men like me is how girls like you lose everything." Maya's blood heated, but before she could retort, Ethan rose from the bench. He walked toward them, slow and deliberate, and positioned himself between Maya and Trent. The tension between the two men was palpable, old rivals whose history needed no explanation to anyone watching. Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Leave her alone, Trent. This isn't your playground." Trent's laugh was harsh. "Protecting her now? What are you going to do, Ethan? Buy her truck with what little you've got left? Oh, I forgot. You're not the golden boy anymore. You're just another washed-up has-been who doesn't know when to quit." Maya expected Ethan to lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he straightened to his full height and let Trent's words roll off him like rain off a windshield. "Funny," he said quietly, coming from a man who's still chasing headlines because he has nothing else worth chasing. The words landed. For a moment, Trent's mask cracked and Maya saw the flicker of insecurity beneath. But rather than respond, Trent sneered, turned sharply on his heel, and stalked back to his Lexus. The car peeled away, tires spitting water. Silence lingered in his wake. Customers whispered, glancing at Ethan and Maya with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Ethan turned back to the counter, his lip twitching as if he wanted to smile but wasn't sure if it was safe. Maya's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the strange exhilaration of standing together against a man who had tried to belittle them both. She cleared her throat. "Well, guess I won't be putting him on my regulars list." Ethan chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "You handled him better than most boardrooms ever did." The compliment unsettled her more than Trent's threats had. She busied herself with stacking containers, unwilling to meet Ethan's gaze. Yet she couldn't deny the way her chest warmed at his words. That evening, after the truck was closed and the streets quieted, Ethan stayed behind again to help her clean. She tried to wave him off, but he insisted, taking out the trash, scrubbing counters with the precision of someone used to working until things gleamed. It struck her as strange. This was a man who had once commanded corporations worth billions, and here he was wiping grease from her fryer basket, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. When they finished, they sat on the curb together, sharing the last 2 slices of cornbread. For a long while they ate in silence, the night settling around them like a blanket. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I used to know someone who wore a bracelet like that." He gestured toward her wrist. "Plastic, blue charm, kind of scratched up. She was a kid then." Maya froze, her hand instinctively covering the bracelet. Her eyes narrowed. Lots of kids wear bracelets. Not like that one, Ethan said softly. I gave it to her. Told her if she kept it, we'd always be friends. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. She remembered that day. Sunlight streaming through the Coles porch, Ethan's mismatched socks, his solemn little boy face as he pressed the bracelet into her hand. Don't lose it, he had said. She had never taken it off since. But the man sitting beside her now couldn't possibly be the same boy. Could he? Her voice was sharper than she intended. What's your point? Ethan held her gaze, his expression unreadable. My point is, sometimes the past doesn't stay gone. Sometimes it finds its way back. The words hung heavy between them. Maya's chest tightened with a swirl of hope, fear, and disbelief. She wanted to demand answers. To ask if he really was the boy she remembered. If all those afternoons hiding under porches and laughing over peanut butter crackers had belonged to them both. But she swallowed the questions, burying them beneath caution. The world had taught her not to believe in coincidences too easily. Instead, she stood brushing crumbs from her lap. Good night, Ethan. Don't stay up too late chasing ghosts. She turned before he could respond, climbing into her truck. Yet as she drove away, her fingers brushed the bracelet again and again, and her heart whispered what her mind refused to admit, that the boy she had once loved as her only friend might have come back to her, not as a memory, but as a man. Shadows of the past, the night bled into morning with the slow heaviness only rain could bring. Maya's food truck closed earlier than usual. Her mind restless even as her body ached from the long day. She locked the doors, counted the small stack of bills she'd made, and exhaled in disappointment. Barely enough for tomorrow's supplies, barely enough for gas, let alone the overdue utility bill waiting at home on her kitchen counter. Still, she told herself the same thing she always did at the end of a slow day. At least someone left fed and warmed. That was enough to keep her going, even if it wasn't always enough to keep the lights on. But tonight wasn't like every other night. The image of Ethan, if that was even really his name, taking the slap for her, kept replaying in her mind. She had seen strange things working in the food business. Drunk men singing love songs to their sandwiches, mothers crying into styrofoam boxes of fried chicken because they couldn't cook anymore after working double shifts. Teenagers stealing cornbread because they were too proud to ask for help. But she had never seen a man like that. One who looked so worn, so fragile beneath the surface of strength, stepped between her and danger, offering his own body as a shield without hesitation. That kind of instinct wasn't ordinary. It was rooted in something deep, something old, something she wasn't sure she wanted to dig into yet. She leaned back against the cracked leather seat of her aging truck and let her head rest for a moment. Through the windshield, raindrops distorted the glow of the streetlights into trembling halos. She thought of his face when he said, "Because I couldn't let him hurt you." The words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished. They were raw, as though torn from a place inside him that had been waiting too long to be spoken. Across town, Ethan Cole sat in his penthouse, though the luxury of the space did little to soothe him. The high-rise glass walls reflected the sprawl of the city, but all Ethan saw was emptiness. He moved through the apartment like a stranger, the silence pressing in from every direction. The marble counters, the designer furniture, the art worth more than most people's annual salaries, it all seemed absurd now. He had built this life brick by brick, dollar by dollar, headline by headline. Yet here he was, standing in a gilded cage with no one to share it with. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, not because he wanted it, but because it was easier than confronting the stillness of his thoughts. The liquor burned down his throat, but it couldn't scorch away the memory of Trent's smug face or the sting of betrayal that still haunted him. Meredith's name lingered like poison in his veins. She had been everything, his fiancée, his confidant, his supposed partner. Together they had planned a future, homes, charities, even children. And then in the span of weeks she had dismantled him, not just by walking away, but by stripping him bare before the world. 20 million siphoned, contracts leaked, his best friend turned co-conspirator. A scandal so delicious the tabloids fed on it for months. He had weathered business failures before, but this was different. This wasn't the market or competition, it was personal. She hadn't just stolen his money. She had stolen his trust, his pride, the foundation he stood on, and in the silence of his apartment, Ethan realized that it wasn't the financial loss that cut deepest. It was the loneliness she left behind. The sense that no one, not even the woman who had sworn forever, had ever truly seen him for who he was beneath the empire. He sat heavily on the leather sofa, pressing the glass to his temple, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his mind drifted back to the food truck, to the warmth of the stew, the smell of thyme and chili, the fire in the woman's eyes as she stood up to Trent. Maya. That was her name, wasn't it? She had said it when someone called her from the sidewalk, asking for extra napkins. He had heard it, tucked it away. Maya. He whispered it aloud now, testing it against the empty air. It felt strange on his tongue and yet achingly familiar. He remembered another Maya. A little girl with quick laughter and stubborn pride, peeling carrots at his mother's table. Could it be the same? His rational mind told him it was impossible, but the taste of the stew argued otherwise. And when he remembered the bracelet she wore, the one that had glimmered faintly as she stepped out of the truck, his heart clenched. He had given that bracelet away once, long ago, when he was just a boy who believed plastic trinkets could carry promises. Don't lose this, he had told her. If you wear it, we'll always be friends. He had been 12. She had been 9. Life had stolen the years between them, but maybe, just maybe, that promise had survived. The next day dawned gray and cold. Maya dragged herself from bed, sore in every muscle, but with determination pressing her forward. She brewed strong coffee, dressed in her work clothes, and headed to the truck. The engine sputtered before catching, coughing black smoke before settling into its familiar rumble. She muttered a prayer under her breath. Just one more day, Lord. Keep this thing running one more day, and steered toward her usual corner downtown. By noon, the drizzle had lightened and the street was alive again with office workers and students seeking cheap meals. Maya worked with practiced efficiency, flipping plantain fritters, dishing out rice and beans, serving up trays of jerk chicken and collard greens. The line moved quickly, her hands steady even as her mind wandered back to the man from last night. Ethan. She had Googled the name once she got home, and the search results had been overwhelming. Headlines, interviews, stock market graphs, scandals. It was like looking up a myth, someone so larger than life he didn't seem real, and yet she had seen him. Flesh and blood, broken lip, haunted eyes, standing outside her truck like any other lost soul. Her thoughts were interrupted when she saw him again. No hoodie this time. He wore a plain navy jacket, still simple compared to the tailored suit she'd seen online, but enough to make him stand out from her usual customers. He stood in line quietly, hands in pockets, head slightly bowed. People around him whispered, pointing discreetly, but he ignored them. When he reached the counter, Maya met his gaze. Back for round 2? She asked, raising an eyebrow. His lips tugged into the faintest smile. Guess I couldn't stay away. She served him another bowl of stew, but this time he lingered instead of heading to the bench. He leaned against the counter, watching her work between customers. You ever get tired? He asked after a moment. Maya snorted. Always. But tired doesn't pay bills, so I keep moving. Ethan studied her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You run this whole truck by yourself? Pretty much. Sometimes my cousin helps on weekends, but it's mostly me. She handed change to a customer, then glanced back at him. Why, you applying for a job? His smile deepened just slightly. Maybe. There was a quiet between them, filled by the clatter of cooking and the chatter of waiting customers. Maya could feel his eyes on her, not in the predatory way she'd learned to guard against, but with something softer. Curiosity. Maybe even admiration. It made her uneasy but not unwelcome. As the rush slowed, Ethan asked, So why this? Why a food truck? Maya paused, wiping her hands on a towel. Because food saved me. After my mama passed, I didn't have much. But I had her recipes. I had her voice in my head telling me to stir slow, to taste often, to feed people with love. I figured if I could keep that alive, maybe I could keep her alive too. And maybe I could build something of my own along the way. Her words hung in the air, unpolished but true. Ethan looked down at his bowl, stirring absent-mindedly. He thought of his own mother, her kitchen, the warmth he hadn't felt in years. He thought of how far he'd drifted from that kind of simplicity. His empire had been built on innovation, on outpacing competitors, on cutting deals that left little room for heart. But here, in this food truck, He saw more resilience than in boardrooms filled with men in $1,000 suits. By evening, as the last customer left and Maya began to close up, Ethan lingered. He helped her stack containers, wipe down the counters, and even carried trash bags to the dumpster without being asked. She eyed him suspiciously but didn't stop him. Finally, as they stood side by side in the quiet, Maya broke the silence. "Why are you really here?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady but shadowed. "Because I needed something real, and I think maybe you remind me of that." Her heart gave a strange flutter, but she masked it with a skeptical look. "You don't even know me," his voice dropped. "Maybe I used to." The words slid between them like a secret neither was ready to face. Maya's hand brushed the bracelet on her wrist, the plastic charm worn smooth over years. She looked at him closely, at the curve of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow, the way his eyes held hers. A thought stirred, but she pushed it down. It couldn't be. Not after all this time. "Good night, Ethan," she said finally, breaking the tension. He gave a small nod, as though accepting the distance she had drawn, and walked away into the drizzle. Maya watched him go, her chest tight with questions she wasn't ready to ask. She told herself he was just a customer, just another man passing through her corner of the world. But deep down, in the quiet place she rarely let herself feel, she wondered if fate was circling back, tying threads she thought had long since unraveled. Sparks in the rain. The rain had a way of softening the city. It blurred the neon signs into watercolor streaks, turned sharp concrete edges into something almost forgiving, and slowed even the most impatient pedestrians as they huddled beneath umbrellas or hunched jackets. But for Maya Williams, rain meant fewer customers. Most people didn't want to stand in line for food when their socks were already soaked through. Still, she kept the grill hot. Onions hissed, peppers blistered, and the iron griddle sang its steady song like it had a soul of its own. Her food truck, Soul on Wheels, was more than a vehicle or a business. It was the beating heart of her dreams, and if she was being honest, her survival. Rent didn't wait for sunshine. Debt collectors didn't care about the weather. And her mama's voice, gentle yet firm in memory, reminded her that feeding people wasn't just about making money. It was about giving them something warm to hold when life turned cold. The drizzle picked up, tapping on the aluminum awning in a steady rhythm. Maya adjusted her head wrap, tightened her apron strings, and leaned over the counter. For now, the street was quiet, just the hum of tires splashing through puddles and the occasional shuffle of a passerby. Then she heard it, a voice, low, cracked, tired in a way that didn't come from just one night of bad sleep. Just something warm. "I don't care what," Maya looked up. The man in front of her wore a gray hoodie, darkened to near black by the rain. His shoulders slumped as though he'd been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. Water dripped from his sleeves, rolled off his jawline, and fell silently onto the pavement. He didn't meet her eyes at first, and when he did, she caught the kind of exhaustion that ran deeper than fatigue. It was grief. It was disappointment. It was defeat. Something in her chest tugged. She'd seen hungry eyes before, but this was different. This was someone who needed more than food. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that didn't push, just offered. "Rough day, huh?" The man let out a sound, half breath, half laugh, hollow but real. "You could say that." "Well," Maya said, straightening her back and gesturing toward the grill, "I got just the thing. Give me 5 minutes." He gave a slow nod, wordless, and leaned against the light pole nearby, his hands shoved deep into the pocket of his hoodie. His posture was defensive but also vulnerable, like someone used to bracing for impact. Maya turned back to her tools, letting her hands move on instinct. A ladle of oxtail stew, simmered since morning until the broth turned silk, rich with marrow and thyme. She added diced carrots, potatoes, and a touch of Scotch bonnet pepper, heat that warmed the chest without overwhelming the tongue. From the warmer, she pulled a square of cornbread, edges toasted golden, butter brushed on top. She garnished with a sprig of parsley, just like her mama taught her. Food should look like love before it tastes like it. The steam curled up, carrying with it a smell that stopped her for just a heartbeat. That stew, every time she cooked it, pulled her back to childhood, to Saturdays spent in Mrs. Cole's kitchen, to stirring pots taller than her arms, to laughing with a boy who wore mismatched socks and called her Chef Maya, like it was the highest title in the world. She shook the memory away. That was a lifetime ago. Sealing the container, she slid it into a brown paper bag and handed it through the window. Here, soul food for the soul. The man reached out. His fingers brushed hers ice cold. He blinked as if surprised by the warmth of her hand. Thanks. He hesitated, his eyes finally lifting to hers. There was something searching in them, something almost afraid. Then came the question, unexpected, raw, and sharp enough to cut through the rain. Can I ask you something? Maya tilted her head, curious. Sure. What makes someone stay kind after life's been unkind? The spatula in her hand felt suddenly heavier. She swallowed. That wasn't a question people asked lightly. She thought of eviction notices, of days working 3 jobs, of the nights she sat alone in the truck crying quietly so no one would see. She thought of how cruel the world could be, and how stubborn she'd been in refusing to let it change her heart. Her voice was steady when she answered. Sometimes kindness is the only thing that's still yours. When you've lost everything else, you hold on to that. The man blinked slowly. His jaw tightened as if fighting back something. He nodded once, then turned away. He carried the bag to a bench by the curb, sat down heavily, and opened the container. The steam rose into his face, and for a moment his expression cracked, not with pain but with something like recognition. He took one spoonful and his eyes closed. The stew hit him like a memory. Not just taste, but time itself unraveling inside him. It wasn't just food. It was home. It was Saturday mornings in his mother's kitchen, his mom humming gospel as she stirred. It was Maria, the housemaid, laughing as her daughter, what was her name, Maya, clumsily peeled carrots, giggling when Maria scolded her with a wet dish rag. It was the boy he had been, sitting at that table, mismatched socks hidden under school trousers, showing a little girl his comic books. His chest tightened. He hadn't thought of those days in decades. Another spoonful and the ache in his heart shifted. The betrayal, the loss, the humiliation, it all dimmed just for a moment. He had been abandoned, ruined, made a spectacle. But here in the rain, this stew carried him back to a time when life was simpler. When kindness was untainted. He opened his eyes. That's when headlights cut across the street. A silver Lexus screeched to a stop beside the food truck, water splashing high from the tires. The door swung open and out stepped Trent Mallory, tailored suit, slick back hair, and a grin sharp enough to slice glass. Ethan's longtime rival, the kind of man who thrived on headlines, who built empires out of arrogance and whispers. Well, 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 Trent called, voice booming even over the rain. Is that the great Ethan Cole? Reduced to eating stew from a curbside shack? Maya froze behind the counter. Ethan Cole? She didn't know the name personally, but she'd heard it before. Tech billionaire, CEO, scandals splashed across business magazines. A man who had once been untouchable. Ethan didn't move. He just kept his gaze low, shoulders stiff. Trent strode closer, loud enough that the few others on the street began to turn and stare. Guess the rumors are true. Your little fiancé ran off with your bank account and your pride. Millions gone and not a drop of sense left in that pretty head of yours. Whispers rippled. Maya clenched the spatula in her hand, the heat rising in her chest. Ethan still said nothing. He stared into his stew like it was a lifeline. His jaw was tight, his lip trembling faintly. Trent sneered. Played like a fiddle. You always were weak, Ethan. That's enough. Maya's voice cut through the drizzle like a blade. She stepped out of the truck, apron still tied, spatula in hand like a sword. Her chin lifted, eyes flashing. You must be one of those rich boys who got fed too much trash and think it makes you better than real people. Trent blinked, thrown off by the sheer fire in her tone. This man didn't ask for your company or your opinion, she continued, stepping closer. And if you think stomping through my kitchen with your cheap cologne and cheaper insults makes you powerful, baby, you've mistaken your ego for your manhood. Gasps from bystanders. A muffled laugh. Trent's jaw twitched. His face flushed crimson as he stepped forward, towering over her. You better watch your mouth, girl. Maya didn't flinch. Or what? You'll sue me with your daddy's lawyer? The insult landed. Trent's hand rose, palm open. Time slowed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Maya's muscles tensed, but before she could move, Ethan was on his feet. The slap landed, but not on her. Ethan took it. Straight to the jaw. The sound cracked louder than it should have, sharp in the damp night. His head turned with the blow, lip splitting. But he didn't fight back. He just stood there, steady, eyes locked on Trent with quiet defiance. Trent cursed. Ego bruised more than his palm, and stormed back to his car. The Lexus roared off, tires hissing over wet pavement. Silence settled, broken only by the patter of rain. Maya stared at Ethan, stunned. Her chest was heaving, heart hammering. Why would you take that for me? Ethan wiped the blood from his lip. His chuckle was hoarse, almost broken. Because I couldn't let him hurt you. The words hung in the air, too heavy, too familiar. Maya's eyes narrowed. Something in her stirred, a memory just out of reach. She studied him. His voice, his eyes, the way he said it. Do I know you? Ethan's smile was faint, pained, but real. Not yet.